would it be fair to characterize it to say that this Amy Hamm case is looks like or could be construed as a dry run for the Online Harms Act in
Yeah.
some ways? Because
I would say so. Yeah, I think the vulnerabilities are there for the same sort of thing to happen.
Welcome to episode 6 in the second season of Justice Center Weekly, a podcast from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. I'm your host, Kevin Steele, and with us today is lawyer Lisa Bildy. Lisa, supported by funding from the Justice Center, is representing BC nurse Amy Hamm in her disciplinary hearing in front of the BC College of Nurses and Midwives for her gender-critical views. In prepping for this conversation, Lisa, I went to the Justice Center website and searched for press releases about Amy Hamm, and I find the first one dated July 10th, 2021. By that time, and this is in the press release, the college had already put together a 332-page report on Amy's activities. Ms. Hamm actually put up her billboard, I Heart J.K. Rowling, in September 2020. And a complaint about that is what brought her to the attention of the college. My point is that this has been going on for 3 years at least. Anyone want to talk about the process being the punishment? Lisa, maybe you could start by telling us why this is taking so long.
Sure. Well, it is taking a long time, although it isn't outside of the realm of somewhat normal. I mean, I think it might be a little bit longer than we might normally see, but not to the point where you could say, it should be stopped because of undue process or undue hardship, I should say. But, the reality is that it's a big case, and it's gotten bigger as we've gone along. And as a result, our original estimate of 7 days to complete this hearing was just way out of whack. I'll back up a little further and say that, so yes, the billboard went up in September of 2020. Complaints came in, I believe, October of that year. And then the college had to conduct an internal review, and we had to make some formal submissions to the investigations committee of the college so that they could decide whether it would go to discipline or whether it could be resolved. The terms for resolving it were just not at all reasonable for Ms. Hamm to agree to. So we were essentially, forced to have it go to discipline. So there were some internal processes first that took up a bit of time. And I think probably that first press release was around the time we made our written submissions to the investigations committee. And then beyond that, we had to set dates with counsel for what we thought was going to be 7 days of hearing. There are 3 panel members, and so their timeline had to be coordinated with that. And as the 7 days, which was in the fall of 2021, completed, we were really nowhere close to being done. The college was still on its witnesses. We were just finishing the cross-examination of Dr. Greta Bauer, who was one of their experts, and we hadn't even had a chance yet to begin Ms. Hamm's case. And the other thing that I'll mention, so we came back actually in January of 2023 to do another segment, but we still didn't finish. And in part, that was because the college decided that it was going to challenge all of our experts. And so we had some days of qualification hearings to determine whether they would even be allowed to testify. And intermixed with all of that were behind the scenes written submissions that we were doing, because they had wanted to have all of our experts actually basically bounced at the point of their own expert testifying about them rather than them getting in the stand themselves. And so we had written argument back and forth about that behind the scenes, and the college was unsuccessful on that. So then we could put our experts in the stand. One of our experts was, in fact, disqualified, Dr. Miriam Grossman, and just on the basis that she was an advocate for a side. That was what the panel had essentially found. And so then we had to basically scramble and find another expert to replace her on the medical side and psychological side. So that was Dr. James Cantor, who then had to get his report done and filed. Anyway, my answer is about just as long as the hearing, but that's essentially what has taken so long. Is just been, there's been so much, and the case has grown as we've gone along. We did finish it in the evidence part of it in November of 2023. We got our case in at that point, and then we had to do written submissions because it's a very complex case on the law. So the college filed its written submissions at the end of January, which were almost 100 pages. And then we completed ours. I wrote them for on behalf of Amy Hamm. We had another lawyer assisting. Karen Basto was assisting with the evidence part. She's a very competent trial lawyer, so she was helping on that front. And our submissions were another 85 pages to add to the mix, and then they had reply. And now we're going to just do oral submissions next week, which will be an opportunity for us to talk to the panel again. They'll now have reviewed all of our written submissions, and we'll have to just zero in on what the issues are and how we think that they should decide the case.
So is this the final stage then at this point? The oral submission?
Correct.
Submission?
Right. And then the panel will go away and write its decision. And that typically takes 3 to 6 months.
Okay. And can you tip your hand to us at all? Tell us what's going on with our side here, or with Amy's defense?
Oh, well, I mean, I can certainly tell you the things that we put in our defense. But in terms of how I think it's going to shake out, I mean, we're in the panel's hands, and they've heard a lot of great testimony. I think our evidence went in very well. But it's ultimately up to them to decide what weight they will place on the evidence of any particular witness, and what they will find as facts in the case, and whether they think that the college has met its burden, because it has to prove that they had that Ms. Hamm's off-duty conduct was something that they were allowed to regulate in the first place in this instance, and that it met the standard of being unprofessional conduct. And so that burden is on them, and I don't think that they can meet it, but the panel may think differently.
Okay. So is that the main point of your defense then, the fact that she was on her own time when she was doing this?
Well, that's part of it. I mean, the college does have some ability to regulate off-duty conduct. Like all regulatory bodies, they're self-regulating, and so it's members of the profession themselves who, for the most part, do the regulating. So the panel is comprised of 2 nurses and a member of the public. And, this is going to be a very different case than what they would normally have heard. You think about the kinds of things that would get a nurse before a regulatory panel for discipline. They maybe have scooped some of the medications, or misdosed things, or, breached patient confidentiality, or just a myriad of things that would come up in a day-to-day situation for nurses. Free speech cases wouldn't typically. This, I would think, is fairly unusual for them to have to deal with. So it is novel in the sense that the college is trying to regulate somebody else's opinions on their off-duty time. Their hook, they say, is because in some cases she identified herself as a nurse. And so it was in her bio of some of the articles that she had written. I mean, it came in after mom. It was like, I live in wherever, and I'm a mom and a nurse. It was just sort of a minor biographical detail, as opposed to saying, I'm a nurse, and therefore, based on my authority and my professional opinion, this is what you should do in this medical situation. I mean, it wasn't like that. So in my view, it's really quite a stretch to reach into her opinions on political issues and issues in the public square that are, a raging debate at the moment, and to say, well, we don't like those opinions. They're kind of distasteful to us in our opinion, and we're embarrassed that you have these opinions, and so we're going to punish you for them. And that's essentially what they're saying. If you read between the lines, we don't like those particular opinions, and so we're going to use our disciplinary powers to rein you in.
Right. So you're saying that when she made the disclosure that she was a nurse, she wasn't claiming expertise in the topic, is what you're saying.
Right.
And that, I assume, is fairly important.
It is. Now, I mean, we have seen cases where the colleges have been trying to, like different colleges across the country and different provinces have been trying to regulate their members' speech. We saw, obviously, the Jordan Peterson case, which was probably one of the most notorious. But there is a line there. And it's one thing if you are, say, committing a sexual offense and you're a doctor who needs to behave, it's on your off-duty time in a dating situation or whatever, and you're a doctor who has to be trusted around patients. Maybe there's an argument on those kinds of cases, and there have been. That's why that example came to mind. There was one recently, but when we're talking about speech, it really is kind of moving into overreach. I think when the colleges are saying that that debates in the public square, just because somebody knows you're a nurse or a doctor or a professional, somehow brings you under the purview of the regulatory body. And that is what a lot of them are really trying to do. So it's important to push back. If nothing else, it will make them think a little bit more, critically about whether this is a case that they want to take forward. Because, like for all of these regulatory bodies, they'll have to make that assessment. If people start pushing back and saying, and we had this with some of the COVID cases too, where only doctors who were making critical comments about COVID policy were getting disciplined by their colleges. Well, is that just because you don't like when they go against the so-called consensus? You weren't going after the doctors who were rude and unprofessional, but were on the other side, just these guys, right? So you start to see it being used as a bit of a bit of a weapon to rein in speech that is against the narrative. It sort of supports the manufactured consensus on a lot of topics, and transgender issues would be perhaps one of those. And so, anyway, I think it's important to be able to push back in cases where that's reasonable to do so, and help everybody figure out where this line appropriately is. And I don't think that the line should include the college defending their own reputation from being associated with opinions that they find distasteful, because lots of other people don't find those opinions distasteful. And I may also add that I think in this particular case, we've now seen polling that suggests that the vast majority of Canadians would agree with Ms. Hamm on her opinions. And so it's a very small number of people who are really kind of pushing these ideas and passing them off as being beyond debate and beyond any further discussion. Well, no, they aren't. And, it's not appropriate for a regulatory body to cut the debate short, to basically say there is no debate. And they've actually said that in this hearing.
Right. Now, going back to your example of a case where lines were crossed, you talked about a doctor that was being disciplined for behavior. I assume that there was criminal behavior there involved, but there's none in Amy Hamm's case, as far as I understand it.
No, there's nothing that crosses any line towards what even remotely could be called hate speech. She's basically gender critical, you might say feminist, but there's a genre of opinions out there that kind of get caught up under what's known as gender critical feminism. And in the United Kingdom, this is actually now being protected as speech that has, they're characterizing it as a belief system that is entitled to protection, because women were being basically picked off for having opinions on the protection of women's rights and child safeguarding, completely inappropriately. But because of the conflict that we're having these days between gender identity and sex-based rights and protections, there is a conflict. And the conflict isn't solved by having one side basically stifle the other side, because you don't get authentic support for that. It doesn't actually solve problems. What you have to do is you have to discuss and debate and deliberate about where the lines are and how best to find the space that's the most workable. But shutting down the discussion, which is what these activists on the transgender activist side tend to do, obviously is not constructive.
You had brought up Britain there, and that's interesting, of course, because of the genesis of this case, which was the billboard "I Heart J.K. Rowling," the author of Harry Potter books, and she came out in 2019 in defense of somebody that had the gender critical views. Just as an aside, do you know if that law that's been passed in the UK has anything to do with the Rowling controversy?
I don't know that they are directly related. I mean, the woman that J.K. Rowling was defending was Maya Forstater, whose case actually did find that her views were entitled to protection. So, I mean, there's a connection in that sense. And then there have been some other cases since then, which we put into our submissions as well. I mean, it's important for the panel to understand, if they hadn't weighed into this debate or this topic in social media or wherever, they may not have been as familiar with all of the arguments. And so it's important for them to understand that this is a live issue. We had Kathleen Stock, who is a professor of philosophy she was formerly at Sussex University, driven out by her because of her gender critical views. But she really provided a wonderful sort of explanation of the philosophical and basis for the gender critical perspective, and why it's so important that we protect language and we allow ourselves to have language that can properly explain categories: male, female, boy, girl. Since time immemorial, we've had these categories which everybody has understood, and now we can't anymore. And that's one of the arguments and points that Amy Hamm's been raising in her advocacy is, you can't just say there's no such thing as women anymore, or that women include men who identify as women. And so Kathleen Stock her evidence was really interesting on that point. And anyway, it's a global, or at least a Western world sort of issue at the moment, and a lot of it is really being argued on Amy Hamm's back. So as she goes through this now, 3.5 years of dealing with all of this, it undoubtedly is very, very stressful, but it's also very important. And thankfully, she's had the courage to continue to fight. I have to wonder how many professionals sort of just decide, look, it's not worth it to me to fight this and to take risks. And I'm just going to sign whatever they ask me to sign. And even if I don't agree with it, just so I can keep my license, it's a little frightening that the regulatory bodies have this power over professionals that goes beyond regulating their competence and their ethics and, the things that are absolutely necessary for them to practice in their profession.
Well, you were mentioning some of the submissions that you were including in your evidence, or have included in your evidence, and it's sounded like something that I would like to read. Now, is this stuff available? Is it published online now, or is it going to be made available?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why we couldn't put our submissions on the Justice Center website. So I will speak to the communications department there and see if we can do that.
Great, yeah. Because, I was looking at the timeline as I introduced the topic here, and I was thinking, well, this is epic. And there's got to be a book coming out sometime about this, and it should include the arguments that you're talking about, because they sound interesting, and it's something that I think that needs wider dissemination. In terms of Canada, are you aware of any movement that's trying to get a similar law passed to the one that's in Britain right now?
It's not. I don't know that it's a law. I'm not as familiar, but it's in the case law that it's been protected as protected speech. I'm not sure if it's been written in exactly, but I could be wrong on that. And no, I'm not. I'm not aware of any. But once the current government is gone, I'm really hopeful that the next one the Conservative government will look at the impact of the online harms bill, which is basically an extension of what we're seeing with Amy Hamm. In my opinion, that you're now going to have, like in her case, it was activists who discovered she was a nurse and therefore thought they had this hook to kind of punish her for the views that they don't like anybody expressing. Basically, that men cannot be women, and that kids should not be transitioned at a young age. They can't give informed consent, and a variety of issues that I think most people would say that the discussion is not closed on those things, but the activists don't want to hear it. So they use these licensing bodies as basically a way to weaponize their powers of discipline. And if they happen to fall into the hands of like-minded people who work in these institutions, which I think is easily found nowadays, because it's sort of spread out everywhere into most institutions, then suddenly they run full steam ahead with the discipline. But now we're going to see with the online harms bill something similar happening, where again, it's supposed to be limited to hate speech, but you still hear all the time people saying things like, well, that speech is violence, and that caused harm to me, and these words are just so easily redefined and expanded and interpreted in such a way that who knows what speech is going to be captured up in it. And now you don't have to be a regulated professional. You can just be anybody online, and somebody could report you to the Human Rights Tribunal and have your whole world turned upside down, perhaps for just as many years. So hopefully the Conservatives will put an end to all of that, and also perhaps give some consideration to Bill C-16 and the gender identity issues, which just provide some clarity on that, so that people aren't having such conflicts anymore.
You had mentioned the Online Harms Act, and I just wanted to point out, and maybe you could elaborate a bit on this, that there was an internet component to this, because it wasn't just the sign that is the I Heart J.K. Rowling sign that stirred up the controversy. In that 332-page report, they also looked at her online accounts as well. Did that figure prominently in this?
Yeah, well, it's interesting and a little disturbing that once somebody made the complaint, suddenly now she's on the college's radar, and they hired what they called I guess, a forensic investigator to basically scoop everything and anything that she had said on the topic of gender for, I don't know, it was like a 3-year period maybe, on the internet. And so, and during the period when she had nurse in her bio in particular. So that was what they were focusing on. But yeah, they came up with a 330-page dossier of her tweets, of transcripts of podcasts she had done, because she had been active in sort of 2017, 2018, 2019 in there doing some, she'd written some articles. She was hosting some events out in Vancouver, which were being protested. And she was writing about those things and doing some podcasts about it. So all of that got scooped up in the net. And then there was really very little discernment as to what crossed the line. And what became apparent from the fact that, the college basically was relying on this 330 pages, which they were asked by the panel to drill down and show what crossed the line. They came up with an extract document, which I think was about 169 pages. So you look at some of it and you think, well, that's pretty innocuous. I don't know how that crosses a line. But what became apparent is that being basically gender critical was enough to cross the line. That's the implication from all of that. Because there wasn't like a specific tweet that was particularly rude or that they were concerned about it in some way. It was just the general challenging of these notions brought it all into the net.
Okay, well, would it be fair to characterize it to say that this Amy Hamm case is looks like, or could be construed as, a dry run for the Online Harms Act in some ways? Because
I would say so. Yeah, I think the vulnerabilities are there for the same sort of thing to happen, for activists to basically sit there and look through Twitter and find people who've said things that are going against the current orthodoxy, which is increasingly narrow, and then basically filing complaints, and the Human Rights Tribunal will be overwhelmed very, very quickly. I think in Ontario, because remember too, we have this bill is going to be federal. Typically, most of the human rights complaints that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, the denial of services and so on, are dealt with on a provincial basis. And they all have similar wording on gender, inclusion of gender identity and gender expression. But the federal legislation, Bill C-16, which everybody had been talking about, came to prominence because I think first Jordan Peterson and Megan Murphy and others were talking about it. But it had fairly limited scope in terms of how it impacted people's day-to-day lives. Prisons were one, and certainly it has had an impact there, with males being transferred into women's prisons if they identify as women. But for the average person, it would sort of be the provincial legislation that would govern. But they had very similar provisions. This particular bill is only federal, but what it does is it opens up now everybody. I think I assume that the reason that they can make it have jurisdiction is because we're all on like federally regulated broadband and internet. I assume is the hook. But yeah, essentially, people are going to be filing all these complaints. That particular body will become overwhelmed quickly, and it'll be likely 4 years from start to finish. And a lot of people will find that they either can't afford a lawyer, or don't want to have a lawyer. Bad precedents may be set as a result, which narrow the scope of what people can say online. It will definitely chill speech, because who's going to want to go through that ordeal? And I do think that cases like Amy Hamm's also contribute to chilling speech, because other professionals will look at that and say, I don't want that. I don't want my life turned upside down like that. So, you really do need to kind of have some of these cases that go forward to hopefully definitively say, look, that's outside the purview of the colleges. And actually, I think you need the governments to step in and do that too, and say, look, you guys are allowed to self-regulate on ethics and competence, and that's it. like stop regulating speech. That's not allowed. I mean, I think they're going to have to do that at some point.
But if they pass the Online Harms Act, then they're in charge of that. That's the thing. So, okay, the colleges maybe get slapped down, but suddenly we're all Amy Hamms,
right,
in some way. So,
right. Unless the government gets rid of that too, which hopefully they do. But you can't count on anything anymore. Yeah. So it's scary. It is scary that the things that you can say in the public square on a matter of importance and debate. And look, the reality is there's nothing that she has said that hasn't been said in places like the UK, for example, where it has resulted in important change because it's sort of broken through the, it just became like this untouchable subject and nobody could speak up. And there'd be the odd whistleblower who would try to speak up and they would just get crushed. But as more and more people do speak up, then suddenly, a lot of people in Europe and the UK are saying, hey, I don't know that if it's appropriate to give kids puberty blockers and look at what the impacts are. And we got this massive increase in teenage girls. Should we really kind of explore the issues behind this rather than just doing this affirmation only thing? There's so many issues there that benefit from people having candid discussion, and it's a safety issue and a fairness issue in terms of sports, and so many of these things that really should be discussed and talked about. And where they are, then there are some changes happening that the vast majority of the population would think were appropriate changes to make. So we need to keep talking, in other words, and this kind of thing is only going to be harmful. The odd time somebody will say something that is like crosses the line into incitement to violence, which we've always said was not appropriate. But the vast majority of time, it's just unpopular speech, and that is what we do need to defend, because unpopular speech is often accurate and points us in the direction of where we should be going rather than where everybody's just running along like lemmings.
Interesting that you should mention this sort of sea change that's coming. And I started it off by talking about how long this case is dragging out. Obviously, one of the things that's happened in that timeline is this sea change, more people talking about it. Have you found that this has impacted your submissions or your case at all, the sea change that has occurred during the time that she's been before the committee or the college?
Well, I don't think it's hurt to have more people talking about it. One of the things we did, and it was not allowed into evidence, but was we right at the very beginning in 2022, I guess it was, I'm almost losing track of time myself, was we tried to file 10 volumes of popular articles on the topic, just to show that this wasn't some bigot talking about something that was completely settled. No, it wasn't. This is a topic of discussion amongst professionals and the public and in an intelligent and productive way. I mean, it's not, this is not that out there, right? And her speech is right in line with what other people are legitimately discussing. So I wanted the panel to be educated on that a little bit. Now, we didn't get that in, but as time has gone on, and more things have come out. Like, for example, the WPATH new guidelines came out just the week before I was cross-examining one of the doctors, she's not a doctor, but like a PhD, right? Not a medical doctor, who's one of the experts for the college. So I was able, and she was a member of WPATH. And so I was able to ask her, this is, for your listeners, this is the organization that allegedly sets the standards for transgender healthcare globally. But there have been some serious scandals arising out of this, and it's more of an advocacy group than a proper medical body. And that's been coming out through various whistleblowers and so that's a whole big thing. But so the longer it's gone on, the more we've been able to ask questions that have really kind of become very pointed, and put their experts, to the test of supporting all of this, whether they support all this. So I'll give you another example. Just the last question that I asked this particular expert was, she was adamant that if people identified as a woman, that they, in fact, for all legal purposes were. And so we had just had this teacher in Oakville, Ontario, who was in the news. And I was able to ask her, like, this person came to school with prosthetic breasts that were like, big double Z type breasts. And they had been there as a male, identifying as a male the year before. And the school board didn't want to touch it. And it was quite a controversy at the time. But I was able to put that to her and ask her, is this a woman for all legal purposes? And she said that it was, that this person was. So as things have come up in the public square over this long period of time, we've been able to use them. But more recent things like the more recent disclosures about WPATH will not. The evidence is in now. We will not be able to make use of that. And I don't know where the panel's sitting on all of this. I can't read their minds, and so I don't know to what degree it's having an impact.
Okay. Well, maybe we could wrap up just by getting down to specifics here. When is the hearing, and can people view it online? Perhaps give us a few details on what exactly is happening when.
Yes. So people have been watching the whole hearing online. We had 20 days of evidence, and I think on some days we had 350 people watching. So there has been a good turnout to observe already. The last 2 days, it's actually a day and a half, March 18th and 19th. We will just be making our final oral submissions, bearing in mind again that the panel will have all of the written materials before them already. So for those watching, they may just hear the highlights that council want to draw attention to. But we'll be doing that, and you can go onto the college's website. And actually, Amy Hamm has the details on her Twitter as well, and you can find out how to log on if you want to watch.
Okay, I think that we will publicize that on Amy's behalf, and yours as well, of course. It will be good to watch you. Thanks so much, Lisa, for coming on and giving us the heads up on this and the background, of course, as well. I do like the tie-in with the Online Harms Act. I thought that was great. I hope to speak to you again real soon.
Thanks a lot, Kevin.